Welcome back to The Narrative. I'm your storyteller, Callistra Farrier. The Guyana-Venezuela border dispute, the Guyanese are calling it a controversy, not a dispute, and saying that they are not willing to give an inch, as they shouldn't, based on an 1899 agreement, the border between Venezuela and Guyana, that resource-rich Essequibo region. It was considered to have been settled, final, and, as they say, perfect. However, Maduro, in the last few months, this is a conversation that has been going on for years, but it has taken on a new intensity as the Venezuelan people voted in a referendum that their President Maduro had called. Now, it was a consultative referendum, but immediately after, he began on paper the annexation of that region in Guyana. Now, CARICOM is involved in this. They're trying to keep the conversation going and hope that diplomacy will bring some sort of resolution to this problem. Now, the matter is before the international courts, and Guyana saying that they intend to wait on the ruling of the international court, but Venezuela not seeming a bit impatient, and in fact seeking to disregard the authority of the international court. Now, the leaders of Guyana and Venezuela will be meeting on Thursday in St. Vincent to sit down and possibly talk it out. What direction that conversation will go, given that Maduro seems to have boxed himself in and does not seem to have much room to move backwards, and certainly moving forward could likely mean some sort of clash with the United States. So what's going to come out of that meeting on Thursday in St. Vincent is all eyes are on that. It's going to certainly be a major development in this ongoing controversial border dispute between Guyana and Venezuela. Now, joining me now on The Narrative is Dr. Nigel Gravesande. He's a registrar at the University of Guyana, but he's also an international relations analyst to talk to us about a little bit about the history of this situation. It's one of the areas that he studied extensively, and the history of this situation, as well as the way forward and what we can expect from the sit-down between Ofinali and Maduro and in St. Vincent later on this week. Welcome to the program, Dr. Nigel Gravesande.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure being asked to be part of this conversation. I'm delighted to be talking to not only the Grenadian population and policymakers, but the rest of the region, because I know you have an extremely wide coverage. So thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure to have a brain such as yours grace us here on The Narrative. And it's a pleasure to see you. I have not seen you in a long time. You're considered a Grenadian, so it's also in that way that it's a pleasure to have you on as well. Now, this situation has been creating some tension in Guyana. I imagine that the people of Guyana are not comfortable at all with what is happening, given the way that Venezuela is presenting and this overhanging threat, despite the designation of the border, which was considered to be final. There must be quite a level of uncertainty among the regular folks in Guyana. Let's start with that. What's the mood like for people in Guyana?
Well, I want to start by putting this controversy into its proper historical context. And as you quite rightly alluded to, this matter was brought before the Hague Arbitration Tribunal, in which Council for Great Britain, then a colony, Guyana, a colony of Great Britain, Venezuela, and the United States, had 11 days of intense argument. And at the end of it, the 83,000 square miles known to be Guyana's territory was declared, a decision was made, and that decision was agreed to between both Great Britain and Venezuela as legally binding and final, a perfect settlement. And it remained that way until Guyana was about to get its independence in 1966, when suddenly a posthumous memorandum by Mallet Prevot, one of the junior counsels at the Hague Arbitration Tribunal, emerged. And what's important that he indicated that he did not want this memorandum to be opened until after his death. And that poses some very serious legal challenges and questions. Arising out of all of that, the matter was referred to an agreement under the auspices of the United System in 1966, in which both parties agreed with the newly independent Guyana to talk, and the period given was 12 years. There was no movement. Guyana maintained its position, the newly independent country, that this matter was settled and was legally binding and final. And then we had the first intervention of a regional leader, Dr. Eric Williams, a historian who used his good offices, and out of that emerged what was the Protocol of Port of Spain. There were conversations in which there could be the peaceful settlement. That did not, in fact, bear fruit. Venezuela continued to resurrect this issue, claiming some 50,000 square miles of territory. And that is why historians don't refer to this as a border dispute, but rather a territorial controversy. It's a controversy because we hold the firm view that this matter was settled in 1899, and we continue to hold that view. Within the last couple of months, Venezuelan government signaled its intentions of having a referendum that they claimed then was going to be non-binding. Our intelligence revealed that not a significant number of Venezuelans participated. But what is also instructive was that the opposition, that seemed to have some degree of significant traction, indicated that the approach being used by the Maduro government was flawed. And while they may have held the view that there is need for a conversation, they did not participate or encourage their constituents to participate. But immediately after the referendum, what did we see? We saw a very aggressive and vocal Maduro. One saying that he now had this mandate to annex Essequibo. And one has to put that into context, because the ICJ, the International Court of Justice decision on the 1st of December, indicated to both parties that neither shall do anything to change the legal status quo, but to allow the process that has started at the ICJ to continue. There have been several instances of violating this principle, including but not limited to his complete rejection of the legality of the ICJ. The ICJ is a creature of the United Nations system, and Venezuela is a member of the United Nations system.
One of the issues here I want to ask you is that the Male Prevost, the lawyer who penned this letter and suspiciously said, do not open it until after I die. This is all that Venezuela is riding on in their claim that they were cheated in the 1899 arbitral settlement. That it's just that letter. They have not been able to provide any other proof, as far as you know, to support their case that this 2/3 portion of Guyana really should be theirs.
Well, you're absolutely right. This is the only piece of evidence that Venezuela has provided, and they are silent on the fact that they actively participated in the delimitation of the boundaries after the 1899 award and signed off on it, a process that concluded in 1905, and continued to accept the legitimacy of the award. Guyana, in fact, did lose some territory during that period, but has accepted the findings and the demarcation as legally binding and final. So you're absolutely right. the Venezuelan government has not produced a single technical or legal position to indicate that what occurred was fraud, except this posthumous memorandum. And that has been dismissed by many analysts and legal luminaries as can't be standing up to any legal scrutiny because Mallet Provost isn't there to be interrogated, to answer questions, to provide the evidence in which there was fraud. And that creates a real difficulty for Venezuela. And I think they know that.
And especially because this does not involve a pair of shoes, it involves 2/3 of a sovereign nation's territory. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And it is that part of Guyana's territory that it has significant resources, our mineral resources, our oil and gas resources. And one has to contextualize that in light of the fact that now, with our oil and gas focus, we have now the seventh largest natural oil and gas reserves in the world. And the oil that ExxonMobil has been mining is known to be the light sweet crude, which is easier to mine, easier to process, and that becomes an attractive story for Venezuela. I think also one has to understand the resurrection of this claim now, given the domestic situation in Caracas. Um, Maduro is not as popular. He's facing elections next year. And it is my respectful view as a student of history and a student of international relations. Anything that can be done in order to detract from the pressing domestic issues and the territorial controversy is one such that he feels. The extent to which he has miscalculated, history will reveal that. I'm of the view that it was a major miscalculation because the hemispheric bodies, CELAC, CARICOM, OAS, and on the bilateral front, Great Britain, the United States have come squarely on the side of Guyana and have actually been urging that the process of the conclusion of this matter at the ICJ be the litmus test of making a legal determination. And I think Venezuela understands that. And apart from Nicaragua and one other country, I think no traction is being given to his utterances and his position. The important thing to note, though, is that any change or realignment of the boundaries will have implications for the boundaries of Brazil, the largest country in South America, and it's also instructive that within the CELAC group, that President Lula of Brazil is going to be an important interlocutor. And I think Venezuela understands the critical role that Brazil would have to play in this and has been playing in this regard. So it's going to be an interesting period. I think the president of Venezuela has locked himself into a corner. I think Brazil is going to be an important and critical strategic interlocutor in these conversations. And with Prime Minister Skerrit being the chairman of CARICOM now, and Prime Minister Rav Gonzalez being the chairman of CELAC, the Latin American grouping, we are confident in Guyana that there is going to be rationality in treating with this, particularly since President Irfan Ali of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana has already signaled, and quite rightly, in the minds of a lot of Guyanese and analysts, that the issue of conversations involving land territory is not up for discussion, is non negotiable. But we hope that the conversation on Thursday in St. Vincent and the Grenadines will seek to bring back the conversation to a diplomatic fervor, with the expectation that Maduro will understand that the only real option is to let the ICJ process continue, and not to do anything or to say anything that will interfere and be in contravention of the ICJ's decision of 1st of December 2023.
And at this point, though, conversation, diplomacy, but he does not seem to have any room. As you said, he seems to have boxed himself in. He has, even the referendum called for Venezuelans to rule on the legitimacy of the ICJ, to consider the matter. So he's totally not paying any attention to the court. He's totally not paying any attention to CARICOM. We saw that statement that he issued a few days ago. And where does he go from there? He's seeking to wrap Venezuelans in the flag. As you said, seeking to detract from domestic issues with elections coming up. What move does he have to play? It's simply stepping back and eating humble pie and saying, okay, fine, well, we're going to wait on the court, a court that we said that has no jurisdiction in the first place. What move does he have next? How does he get himself out of this? And Venezuela out of this?
The opportunity presented in St. Vincent gives him an opportunity to reassess. The conduct of international relations dictate that it is better to have conversations rather than no conversation at all. And I believe this gives him an opportunity to listen and to hear the perspectives from two major groupings, CELAC and CARICOM, but more importantly, as I said earlier, a critical interlocutor, Brazil, that is strategic in many respects. Strategic since it borders every single territory except two in South America, its own military strength and might, its sphere of influence. And those things cannot be underestimated. It's instructive, however, that after this meeting, an announcement coming out of Caracas is that he's going to be journeying to Russia to have conversations with President Putin. That, in my opinion, as a student of international relations, can only help him to understand the dynamics of what is happening, and bearing in mind that Guyana, from January 2024, assumes for the next 2 years one of the non-permanent members of the Security Council with tremendous influence. He also has to be mindful, in my respectful view, that the United States is watching this very carefully and has given some broad parameters in the easing of its own sanctions, which he needs to be cognizant of. And anything that will disrupt this will put him back, in my respectful view, in a very difficult situation. He could not afford the luxury of more sanctions now. And therefore, he has got to find a mechanism internally to ensure that the utterances that are going to be coming out and the mood of the international community is going to be reflective of what he wants to achieve in the final analysis. For Guyana's part, we are clear on a couple of things. One, we continue to maintain the position that the 1899 Hague Arbitration Tribunal that determined our landmass is legally binding and final. Two, we respect as a country the rule of law and the determination of those institutions that will make a consideration and final determination, and that's the ICJ. And with all of this, one can see the hemispheric grouping, bilateral support, and international support being in the corner of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana. And therefore, we have to continue to use these mechanisms without compromising both our sovereignty and our territorial integrity. And that's not in the mindset of the average Guyanese. They're clear, and as the Guyanese icon Calypsonian, has articulated in his musical message, not a blade of grass. And that is resonating across the length and breadth of our 83,000 square miles of territory.
Dr. Gravesande, let's take a break here. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about just the mood of the Guyanese people and how they are standing with the government, the opposition and the government seems to be of one voice on this matter, and I want to talk about how important that unifying position is within Guyana on this, and as well as take a look a little bit about what's happening in Venezuela, the threat of sanctions, and whether or not Venezuelans facing those sanctions would turn even more hostile to Maduro rather than wrapping themselves more tightly in the flag. We'll take a break here and be right back.
Thank you.
This is The Narrative. I'm on with Dr. Nigel Gravesande, International Relations Analyst and the Registrar at the University of Guyana. We're discussing the situation, what he calls a territorial controversy between Venezuela and Guyana that concerns the Essequibo region, some 2/3 of Guyanese territory that Venezuela is laying claim to based on an old document that they're using that was penned by one of the lawyers who was part of the 1899 settlement of the territory, and now the matter before the International Court, Venezuela not seeming to want to wait on the International Court, and on Thursday both leaders of the leader of Guyana and Venezuela meeting in St. Vincent as multilateral organizations and countries around the region seek to have the conversation going to avoid any sort of escalation as Maduro continues to talk tough about his claim, about Venezuela's claim to that expansive region of Guyana. More when we come back.